Hello, everyone, and welcome to the plant. It's really great to see everyone coming out. We don't know in these days with COVID who's going to make it out, and it's summer, and there are all these conflicting things, so we're really thrilled to have you all here today. My name is Carolee Kokola, and I'm the operations director for Bubbly Dynamics, which is the owner and operator for the plant. The plant itself is a former meatpacking facility that's been repurposed as a collaborative community of small food businesses. So we've got about 15, 20 small businesses. We've got indoor and outdoor farms growing everything from microgreens to wheatgrass, lettuces, herbs, to fruiting vegetables outside. We have beer and kombucha breweries. We have a cheese distributor, a coffee roaster, a chocolate maker. So all kinds of wonderful food is being made right here and going out of our doors. So the businesses here collaborate in lots of different ways, not only in terms of the products that they're making and the ingredients that they're using, but also with the just sort of general business efficiencies. Somebody needs a little extra freezer space, or somebody needs help with a distribution. So there's a lot of really generous souls who are collaborating in really creative ways. And we also see in the building several industry leaders. So even though we have very small businesses, emerging businesses that are pretty shoestring, especially in these times, we see folks who are coming up, who are figuring it out, who are figuring out how to use reusable packaging, to have packaging that might be like an ice cream package is usually slated to go to the landfill. But we have folks in the building, Sacred Serve, who have packaging that can be either composted or recycled. So, and this is just a small business leading the way. So it's really amazing to see folks coming up with new ways to avoid plastics and to avoid the landfill. And then Bubbly Dynamics helps facilitate these efficiencies as well, both for reusing or for resources and for waste, and just how to operate more efficiently, helping connect the outputs from some businesses to inputs of others. So as you go through the building, you'll see things like our gray water wetland down in the lobby. You'll see a carbon dioxide line that connects the brewery, the CO2 coming out of the brewery, kind of wiggles through the building and goes up to the third floor to back of the yard's algae sciences, where the CO2 is used as an input to the algae production process. It's a growth stimulant. And Bubbly Dynamics also implements a robust series of practices for reuse and recycling. So for example, we will take our corrugated cardboard, and instead of sending it to recycling, we divert it, we bale it on site. We also take LDPE plastic film, and we'll bale that, and we'll get it to a materials processor that can guarantee that every scrap of that waste is being used. And we get paid for it. So they're definitely making sure that they're using it. So we're always talking about things like single-use plastics and how to reduce them. And so it's very fitting that we have this discussion here tonight. Before we launch into it, though, just a quick word of housekeeping. The restrooms, out the door to the left, make another left, and there will be large smokehouses that have been repurposed as restrooms. So even if you don't need the restroom, check them out on the way out, because they're pretty cool. There's also some lit at the door here from MWRD. So if you need help knowing what to flush, what not to flush, they can help you out there as well. And then there's also some carafes of water in case anyone needs to re-up on Lake Michigan's finest. There's some cups and so forth back there. So let me turn over to Dean Alanis Diotis, who's the Chief of Staff for MWRD Commissioner Kimberly DuBouclet.
Carolee, thank you very much this evening for hosting us. I appreciate the opportunity. Unfortunately, Commissioner DuBouclet had a personal emergency this evening, so she won't be here. I'm stepping in her place. It's a big shoes to fill, so be patient and kind. And we're excited to be here. Thank you for we actually came and visited, I think, a few months back, and we were fascinated by everything that is happening at the plant every day. And I walked in again and just am inspired to just the sustainability efforts that you guys are working on every day with supporting all these small businesses right in their backyard of Chicago's neighborhood. So thank you for all you do. Plastic Free July is here. So July is considered plastic free month, and never before has this issue been more relevant or necessary for us to discuss. Microplastics and forever chemicals are everywhere. Our lungs, our blood, human placentas, even the most desolate parts of Antarctica have it. We recently saw an article last weekend ran by the Chicago Tribune that over 8 million people in Illinois have forever chemicals in their water. 8 million people. How are plastics getting into our bodies and why does it matter? Is why we're all here tonight. And we're going to have great presentations by our great panelists to talk about these issues. More importantly, bring us to up to date on the technology, the data that's out there, and what each of us can do walking away from this presentation and make an active opportunity for us to reduce the amount of plastic we use in our lives. First, I want to introduce John Scott, Senior Analytical Chemist at the Illinois Sustainable Technology Center, to walk us through a primer of the issue. He's been studying contaminants in the environment for the past 25 years. John's research interests include emerging contaminants such as microplastics and PFAS, waste utilization, and natural products. John?
So before we get into this presentation, one more. Just want to show you some images of the kind of things that we're seeing.
Yeah, so here are some 4 images from MWRD. Who's familiar with MWRD? Raise your hand. Okay. So MWRD sends out a skimmer boat, the bottom left there, twice a day on the Chicago River to clean it up. It's one of our mandates to protect the Chicago River. And the picture on the right, unfortunately, is stuff that we have reclaimed or processed from people that flush them down their toilet. In the last 2 years, as we've seen through COVID, a significant amount of new stuff has come about, if you may. We've seen masks, gloves, and a whole wider range of flushable wipes that aren't flushable in particular come through our system. Are we good? Here's more pictures of that as well through our. There's a beach cleanup that we've done throughout the last couple of years, but it's been fascinating to just sit and think, why would anybody flush a plastic glove or their mask down the toilet? Is the question that we seem to not have an answer on today. Hopefully, John will enlighten us.
You know, I always say that the wastewater treatment operators are the true environmentalists. These guys are dealing with our waste every day. So I have nothing but respect for these guys. So, since the emergence of mass-produced plastics in the 1950s, our global appetite for these materials is increasing at a very rapid rate. As you can see here on the chart on the left, that back in 2013, we were making about 350 million tons of plastic every year. And what I find astonishing is if we continue down this road, business as usual, by the year 2050, every year we'll be making 1.8 billion metric tons in plastic. Staggering numbers. So to date, it's estimated that we've produced about 8.3 billion metric tons of plastic. And Willis Tower is about 230,000 pounds. So that's equivalent to 40,000 Willis Towers. So just an amazing amount of material. And anytime you make this much of anything, you have to ask yourself, well, where's it going? So it's estimated to date, we've produced about 6.3 billion metric tons of plastic waste. And here's a pie chart showing you, looks like a little cut up there, sorry, but it's showing you the fate of these materials. And only a small percentage is recycled, about 9%. And even that's kind of a misnomer because plastic can only be recycled so many times before then it becomes landfill. But the vast majority, 79% of this material, is either put in the landfill or it becomes fugitive in the environment. And as a result of that now, plastics are ubiquitous in the environment. Okay, so real quick, just some definitions when we talk about plastic pollution. Macroplastic, that's anything larger than 5 millimeters. That's like your pop bottle or your mask floating around or laying in the sand. When we talk about microplastics, so it's really the material that's less than 5 millimeters and greater than a micrometer. And now we're even talking about things like nanoplastics, which are going to become very important. They're going to be the new thing that you're going to hear about. And those are pretty much less than 1 micron. And as these things get smaller, they have a higher potential to cross biological membranes. They're more difficult to clean and treat. And they're also a lot more mobile in the environment as they get smaller. They can move around. Now, there's 2 main classes of microplastics. We have our primary ones. And these are the things that are intentionally made to be very small. And we used to add a lot of these things as exfoliants to cosmetics. Also nurdles, which is like a base material for larger plastics. And then also we have some industrial abrasives. But luckily, we don't really see as much of these in the environment anymore. Thanks to regulation and the Micro-Free Beads Act in 2014, we don't really see those perfectly round spheres as much in our environmental samples. But what we do see is what I believe is the secondary microplastics, the breakdown of macroplastics due to wear, abrasion, ultraviolet light, microbial degradation. So that's what the vast majority, I believe, of what we're seeing now is becoming from secondary microplastics. So where do we find them? Basically everywhere we look. Water is intensely studied, but also I believe that sediments and soils are a major final sink for these things. In fact, I've just wrapped up a project looking at agricultural soils, and they're some of the highest things I've ever seen in terms of microplastics. But also we find it in air. I've even found it in rainwater, believe it or not. But indoor air is also another major source of exposure to humans because think of all the textiles that we surround ourselves with. Food, beverages have been reported as well. We intentionally add them to lots of cosmetics. Wastewater obviously has high concentrations of microplastics. Wildlife, we've all seen the birds and the fish cut open and little pieces of plastic being pulled out of them. And actually my group was the first to find microplastics in karst groundwaters. Now karst groundwaters are very open porous systems, but they're important because 25% of the world's population sources their drinking water from karst systems. And it's no surprise since these things are so open and porous that we found microplastics. And here in Illinois, karst systems are common along the western and southern borders. So basically, everywhere we look, and we're even finding it now in human blood and lung tissue. No surprise, we're surrounding ourselves with these things. Next slide. So should we be worried? And when it comes to negative impacts to ecosystems or adverse health effects to humans, we really don't know. The jury is still kind of out on that one. But what we do know is these things are persistent. They are designed to last forever. So here's some examples of some materials and how long it takes for them to degrade. And you can see our cigarette butts and our plastic bags are about 5 to maybe 20 years. Yeah, 20 years. And in the world of persistent pollutants, that's a long time. But now let's talk about things like plastic straws, disposable diapers, water bottles. 450 years to degrade. Incredibly long time. And imagine a child uses about 7,000 diapers until they're potty trained. Those diapers are going to be around longer than 5 times that child. So our landfills just must be swelling with these materials. Next slide. So beyond that, I also think we need to talk about more than just plastic. We know that we add over 6,000 chemical additives to plastic. Things like phthalates, bisphenol A, heavy metals, all these things. We know that many of these compounds are endocrine disrupting, which means they mess with your hormones. We know that some of them are carcinogenic, so we know that they're also persistent. So we need to think about those as well. And we also know that plastic in the environment will soak up pollutants around it, so they act like little sponges. And we know also that plastics will actually harbor very unique bacteria. We've done some studies that looked at, here's an example of from one of our studies, and you can see within 3 months, short amount of time, these plastics started to accumulate biological materials on them. And we know that these materials are a lot different than the surrounding environment. So, and they could even be potentially a carrier for pathogens. All right, next slide. So it's not all gloom and doom. I didn't want to scare you, and I think we could solve this problem. This is a problem that we locally created. We're not some South Pacific island with everybody else's garbage washing up on our shores. So we can fix it. And the place to start, there's a thing called the pollution prevention hierarchy, right? And there's certain steps that you can look at to address pollution. And really the ideal place is to be at the top. You want to avoid using these materials or reduce their production. So that is the most cost-effective, that's the most effective way to address plastic pollution. But it's also the most difficult because we need to find new materials. We need to change people's behavior. So that's really the preferred option. But also I think we need to address the problem at all these stages. Like we need innovations in reuse and recycle. You know, years ago, not even years ago, recently, our idea of recycling was sending all the plastic to China or sending it to Vietnam. Well, they're not taking it anymore. So I'm hoping that to really get to stimulate some technologies and innovations in the area of recycling and reuse. So definitely there's opportunities there. Beyond that, there is the thought of energy recovery. Not the biggest fan, but I have to consider it. There's a group at my organization that looks at turning plastic into fuel, right? Because a lot of this stuff is made from petroleum. So, but I am concerned about hazardous air pollutants and problems there, and then we're just kind of taking the problem from the land and then putting it up in the air. But I still have to entertain that idea because what else are we going to do with it? Because the last option is treat it and put it in the landfill. And I don't think that's the good option. And I'm going to show you why in a little bit. So the other thing I think is we really need an interdisciplinary approach. These are just some thoughts of mine that I put together where I believe that the 4 areas that we should work in and then where they can interact. But obviously we need to find the biggest sources of these things. We need to see how they move through the environment. Where do they end up? We need to, once we have that information, we need to start getting solutions. So we need real solutions that are cost effective. You can't go to the wastewater treatment plant and say it's your problem because these guys are stretched so thin with resources and they have so much to deal with already. And obviously education and outreach. I'm an optimist. I believe if you tell somebody, you educate them, that they'll make the right decision. And definitely, I think all these groups need to interact with the goal of reducing plastic pollution and any emerging contaminant. So I go to a lot of these emerging contaminant conferences, and I always see the physical sciences really well represented. We have great chemists, we got great geologists, toxicologists. But what I'm hungry for is a good psychologist. I think we need some good social science people to get them on board because they can really invoke behavior change. And also an economist. If there's an economist out there, I'm hungry for one. Because a lot of people tell me that, oh, plastic is so widely used because it's cheap. But is it? I believe there's a lot of hidden costs that we're not thinking about, especially with the disposal. And if I can get an economist to crunch the numbers, maybe they can show the real true cost of plastic. So anyhow, just some thoughts of mine. Next slide. So now, real quick, I just want to talk about one of the systems that I'm very interested in. I'm very, very interested in landfill wastewater treatment plant systems. Remember, I told you that 79% of all plastic is destined for the landfill. Most people think that's where it ends. I don't think so. Landfills are aggressive environments. They're meant to break things down. And I believe what's going on is these plastics that are going to the landfill are getting broken down into smaller and smaller sizes. So depending on the style of landfill, a lot of these plastics will translocate what's called the leachate, the landfill leachate, which is typically sent to the wastewater treatment plant. Well, the wastewater treatment plant, they're not designed to be addressing plastic pollution. So the only 2 places it can go is it can be directly discharged to the environment through their effluent, or it ends up in their solids called the biosolids or the sewage sludge. Well, typically that sewage sludge is land applied. And when we land apply it, then it has the potential to run back into the surface water. It can get locked up in the soil, it can get in the groundwater, and it can even potentially translocate to plants. So these are the systems that I've been studying. Already I can tell you that 99.9% of the plastic that goes into the systems I've looked at partitioned to the biosolids. And the significance of this is that we can address it here. Wastewater influence pretty large volumes, like 10,000 gallons per minute is one of the plants, and probably the ones here in Chicago are even greater. So it's almost impossible to deal with that problem there. But leachate, 2,000 gallons per day, 100,000 is another plant that I'm working with, 100,000 gallons per month. But that's something we can manage. And we could potentially treat it here or address the problem here, and then hopefully reduce some of that environmental loading. Obviously, the best place to address the problem is here and here. That's the most efficient. But these are still important because we have hundreds of these landfills in the state of Illinois. And I believe that over time, they're slowly going to be diffusing microplastics into the environment. And we're just at the tip of it, right? Plastic has only been finding its way into the landfills for 70 years. So I think over time, this is going to get worse. But I won't be around probably to say I told you so. But maybe your kids can say John told us. So anyways, yeah, these are the systems I'm interested. And if anybody's got any questions, you can shoot me an email or you can ask me during the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for that insightful presentation. I appreciate all the kind words about wastewater facilities on the work that MWRD does, because we truly are first and foremost public health experts in our right, and deal with a lot of the challenges that you discussed on a day-to-day basis. I want to introduce our two other panelists this evening. Ayana Simba currently serves as the City Programs Director at the Illinois Environmental Council, where she oversees advocacy, coalition building, aldermanic relationships, organizing related to environmental issues in the city of Chicago. And then Andrea is a Senior Director of Government Affairs and Conservation Policy at the Shed Aquarium. As an innovative policy thought leader, her career spans over 25 years, delivering strategic, data-driven, tailored solutions in ever-evolving environments. If you guys have questions, we have a phone number to text them back. I think it's 773-569-5821. If you guys have any questions throughout this evening that you would like our panelists to ask, please text that number and then we'll get them answered at the end of the panel discussion this evening. So I'll first start with a question for all of our panelists. And Andrew, since you're closest, we'll start with you.
Sounds good.
So what do you see as the most significant sort of plastic pollution that is breaking down into micro and nanoplastics?
So it's always fascinating to hear, John, and I've had the privilege to, all three of us have actually had the honor to be together and be part of these conversations. It's always interesting to hear the end of life discussion. And I just want to break the rule of it and not answering your question specifically, but just to get that I really encourage us to think across the lifespan. The end of life is where we've spent a really long time and a lot of policy effort working on. But if we go to the beginning of life, if we prevent the harm before it happens, then the poor municipalities, which are often really small, MWRD, you all are one of the largest in the country, I think only second largest, right?
Correct.
To LA. But smaller municipalities have to deal with this all over the place, as do small communities. And when they have to deal with cleaning up these kind of challenges, I really do think we're going to have the equivalent of PFAS in a few years from now. So when we think about it, it's not one source versus another. It's about the production of it per se, right? How it's produced, that it's not only petroleum that's used in it, but it's also all these other potentially forever chemicals that can have a really lasting impact. And the last thing I'll say that I think is really important for us to focus on is where are the factories and where are the refineries that are doing this work? Who lives near those communities? Who are impacted by it? What are the health outcomes for the folks that live near it? And what are the ways for us to move towards reuse and to holding producers responsible, which I'll talk more about later, that can really help us sort of change the paradigm. It doesn't mean that we have to stop working on what John was talking about and what you all do every day, because we have to, but we can do a both and we shouldn't be afraid to do that.
Sure. Thank you. Ayana?
I will leave this to these two guys. I think they're the
Sure.
ones that are really the
John?
scientific experts.
Well, it's a tough one. I mean, there's so many sources, but I do think, single use is a major thing to tackle. I mean, isn't it crazy that we've designed these materials to last forever, but only intend to use them once? So, but there's a lot that we don't think about too. Next time you drive somewhere, look on the side of the road. You see all that tire wear? That's a very interesting one. We're studying that in my laboratory as well right now. So that's an interesting one. But there's lots of potential sources.
John, foil packets are, something that I think we don't often talk about.
What
And
is that?
foil packets, the packets,
Oh.
there's absolutely no way to recycle them. And they actually have there seems to be more use of that. And are we right about that, or?
Yes, DOE just had a call for proposals. They're very interesting. They call it thin films because they're composites of many different types of plastics, which really makes it complicated, which is important in food packaging, right? Because I mean, if we don't package our food right, then we're going to have a food waste issue, although at least food breaks down. But anyways, yeah, thin films are a big problem, but DOE is working pretty hard on it. I know that they want to try to find good ways to separate the films and recycle them.
So let's dig a little deeper into the science, John. A growing number of scientific studies are identifying the links between plastic production and its impact on human health, aquatic wildlife, including seafood. We are hearing so much these days about forever chemicals and PFAS. You mentioned it's not about plastics. Talk more about that.
Yeah, you want to talk about PFAS. I think there's a lot of similarities of plastic and PFAS, right? They live forever. They're very ubiquitous. And in fact, I study PFAS alongside of microplastics as well. So, yeah, did I cover it? I'm trying to think what I'm trying to drive at here. But they definitely associate with each other too. In fact, a lot of times when you find microplastics at pretty high concentrations, you find a lot of other things, right? Because it's just an indicator of anthropogenic impact. We do find a lot of things like ibuprofen and naproxen and other pharmaceuticals and personal care products and even hormones. Similarly, they're in the same space as these microplastics.
Ayana, John mentioned single-use plastic. Can you talk about the city ordinance here in Chicago about single-use plastics?
Yeah, so this is the ordinance that was introduced last year by Alderwoman Nugent. Is 2021-2869 for anyone that's interested.
It's
or
embedded
policy.
or
A
memory.
policy wonk like me. And basically it reduces single-use plastics by requiring restaurants to only provide single-use plastic by request only. I know there's a later on question. I'll dig more into why that ordinance is a good step, but it's not necessarily the perfect solution for reducing single-use plastics.
And then I just read something, the governor signed a bill on state parks not to be able to use
Yes,
or
procurement.
assign.
Yep. So for procurement for state parks, they're no longer able to have vendors that provide single-use plastics. Instead, they need to come up with compostable or reusable. So that is a good step forward.
So I guess this question is for all our panelists, and Andrew, maybe we can start with you again. So what can we do as individuals about all these plastics becoming micro and nanoplastics in our environment? Let's talk about what seems to be a problem without a solution: microplastics coming off our clothes.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say a couple words about some studies, just so that to give folks a couple other places to look. And not to bounce off of your question, but I want to make sure that folks know that there's actually been quite an increase in the amount of research on human and wildlife impacts. My colleagues, because we do seafood work, have been really tracking what the impacts have been on consumable seafood, what then the potential impacts might be on human health. Just in the last 2 years, there's been quite an increase in research on that. We at this point know the prevalence, thanks to folks like John. Now the next step is, what is the impact on human health and aquatic life health and wildlife health? I get the honor from time to time to be able to work with global and international partners, and one of those is Azul. And they work together with the United Nations Environmental Program, also known as UNEP, and it was a study just that came out last year, and it really talks about, and I really encourage folks to look at it, because it really highlights the impact on environmental justice issues, who's impacted when the waste happens. Mostly here in the middle of our country, it stays here, but I was just in Palau for our oceans conference, and it was terrifying, and I'm gonna actually put some pictures up. of me out kayaking in the middle, literally in the middle of the ocean, and finding plastic pollution. There's nowhere for it to go on that island. But here in our communities, it ends up in the lakes and in the rivers and in the fields and has a real impact on our lives. And the last sort of study thing I just want to note is a really exciting study that I'm really proud that my colleagues at Monterey Bay Aquarium, uh, Margaret was the actually chief running it, which is part of the National Academy of Sciences. The report's called Reckoning the U.S. Role of Global Ocean Pollution and Waste. They don't just stop at ocean. It was published in December of last year. It is a comprehensive study, and anyone who knows the National Academy of Sciences knows it's for the United States. It's our gold star place. I really encourage everyone to read it, to understand it, to read the recommendations. I'm happy to go into detail about those because we helped work on them. And they have asked for the United States government to create a report this year and to set standards to begin monitoring and making sure that EPA has good longitudinal data on the amount of microplastics, nanoplastics, and then for NIH to do good research on the impacts on human, and hopefully for our colleagues at NOAA to be tracking aquatic health impacts. So I just wanted to note that because that took a really long time to us to get there. And then I'm going to go back to what individuals can do. The only reason why that study happened is because individuals raised their voices, right? The only reason why the governor signed an executive order is because it was a priority of the community members. Your voice matters, and your voice together has a huge impact. So I really want to focus tonight on what we can do together to try to drive really higher impact things. As individuals, we can always move towards reuse. I usually have a cup with me and says, and say that this reusable thing is much better than something I throw away every day. But we're now at a place where it's not just about individual behavior. We really need to move an economic model that holds producers responsible and ensures that all of us raise our voice to move that forward.
Thank you. So for going beyond the individual, can we talk about EPR, extended producer responsibility? Andrea, will you please explain what EPR means? You've done an eloquent job on other studies, so I figured it made sense for you
Sorry.
to do so. And then there's a recent groundbreaking comprehensive plastic pollution law that passed in California. And then maybe Ayana can chime in. Are there important insights here for the Great Lakes?
I
Can
think
we
it's a
learn anything?
Huge moment. So people together can have an impact. This room is full.
All you here tonight.
I was just going to say, this room is full. It's gorgeous outside. It's way better to be outside, but you're here. And each of you working together and all of us working together can have a huge impact. I've had the honor to do this work at SHED for 5 years. My colleagues at Monterey Bay Aquarium have been working on this for more than a decade. I am also honored to work with 26 other aquariums around the country. We made a commitment on plastic pollution, and we've tried to walk our talk. As we've done that, it's been amazing to see how many other folks you can bring along, from corporations to governments. So what just happened in California at the last day of June was that it passed the most comprehensive plastic pollution, preventing plastic at the source, piece of legislation in the United States' history. It's very important, and it is the new floor for extended producer responsibility laws. What are extended producer responsibility laws? As opposed to trying to play whack-a-mole and say we're going to, ban plastic bags and we're going to ban, this kind of single use and that kind of single use. And as you just heard, films are a new sort of source of single-use plastic. Instead of that whack-a-mole game, which is the game that we've been playing for way too long, this says the people that produce it, the manufacturers, who are often global manufacturers, they're the ones who should be held responsible for what happens at the end of use. They produce it. It's their job to make sure it ends. That's how we deal with paint. That's how we deal with engine oil. And it's how we should be dealing with plastic. So this was a hell of a work. This took a lot of work, a lot of organizations. But people came together. I'm not going to tell you that it's perfect, because it's not perfect, but it is the best we've ever seen. And because it's not perfect, that's why it's the floor and not the ceiling. So everyone knows that California is a kind of a large state, right? It is, when it comes to GDP, it's 3.7, 3.4 trillion. It's just under Germany as a size of an economy, right? It's huge. It drives things. I'm from outside of Detroit. I always knew when things were changing, when California had a new full economy standard, because I would hear like one of the engineers complain that he has to start retooling all of the cars. Well, now we're going to be forcing global corporations to retooling the way they do business. But we can do that here in Illinois. There is absolutely no reason why we can't. In fact, the Great Lakes, our uh, GDP is around $3 trillion, and if you add Canada, it's almost 6. We can have an additional impact on this. And I've heard over and over and over again that if they can do it in California, we can't do it in Illinois because, oh, it's California. You know, they're so progressive. Well, as far as I can tell, we have a governor, a House, and a Senate. And we need to demand that we move forward and we hold industry responsible. The other secret is that industry was at the table for this bill. They were there for the whole time.
They saw it coming.
They were part of the negotiations. These are the same national organizations that we'll be negotiating with here in Illinois. It's time for us to work together and try to move something forward. Sorry that I'm riled up about it, but let me tell you, my friends stayed up night after night after night after night. They worked their freaking tails off. And by the way, it was almost all women who were the core group that got this thing across the finish line. I love you guys. You guys just need to catch up. We can do this. It is everyday people. They were phone banking. They were going door to door. They made it happen by working old school way, right? There is some inside baseball. I'm always happy to talk about what that looked like, but it was hard, and they won, and we need to take that momentum and bring it here.
So Yana, you have extensive, yeah. So is it possible, Yana, tell us, can we start in Springfield? Do we start in City Hall? Given your extensive background in advocacy, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly about, I can't speak specifically to EPR, but I can say, at the state level, we have done things with plastics. And I think we're moving further away from, we're still in a pandemic, but one of the arguments that was really made early on is that, oh, like we have to have plastic bags because anything reusable is unsafe. And we know that now that that's completely false. So I think that is one political barrier that's gone now. And I do think the idea of trying to do something in Springfield is possible. Speaking more so at the city level, like we have that ordinance that passed last year, which was great. But I think one of the easiest things is to tag onto that. So part of that is that it really addresses restaurants saying that, hey, you have to ask in order for something to be provided. But we're also not thinking about like third party food service delivery companies. I'm still getting foodware in my, like Uber Eats does not care. That's a problem. Like we should be addressing that. We should be thinking about drive-throughs. We should be thinking about restaurants at our airports. These are people that are, or these are things that are exempt that shouldn't be, and these are things that we can fix easily without overburdening restaurants. I think also another possibility is a phased-in ban on styrofoam. So of course, like little cubs, things like that. I know that smaller businesses, that's something that they need because it's very cheap and affordable, but I think this is something that we can phase in so that people aren't necessarily being hit over the head that are still recovering from what's happened during the pandemic. So I think there are some easy fixes that we could do, especially looking towards that ordinance, which was a great first step. But I think there's some things that we can get done. As far as state versus city, I think it can be an and. I don't think it has to be like an or thing. I think it can be an and or. I think having something done at the city of Chicago, people always complain downstate, like everything revolves around Chicago, but I mean, come on, it does. But if we're able to get something done here, we're able to get stuff done in the suburbs, like what that can be a case study for what can be done throughout the state. So, and then vice versa, I think if we're able to really get something done at the state level, then that's covering the entire, state. So I don't know if it is an EPR bill. I don't know if it is more strict procurement of plastics at the city level, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to do something about plastics.
I wanted to ask a follow-up question. So you've heard me go on and on about procurement, and that's partially because that's the power of the purse is a really important component of the power of government, right? Because it's all of our collective money together purchasing things, and usually governments actually are pretty big. So, city of Chicago is one of the largest cities in the country. Cook County is the second largest county in the country. We just at the federal level, that's where I get to play. That's where I play the most. We worked really, really hard to try to get a national, to move back actually to something that we had secured during the Obama administration, which was a reduction of single-use plastic in national parks. We worked with the Department of Interior and the fantastic new secretary and her team. We met with them the first week of June, and they said, you might like what's going to be reported soon. And we did. It wasn't just reducing single-use plastics in all of the national parks. It was the entire Department of Interior across all of its operations moving towards reducing single-use plastic. And just last week, the general GSA, which is all procurement for all federal bodies, just released a request for comment because they are going to be moving towards reducing single-use plastics across the entire federal government. I'd love to think about what that could do for Cook County and Chicago. I just wanted to use those two examples. Do you think we could do that in Cook County? Do you think we could do that in Chicago?
I think we could. I think there's always a possibility. I think one of the things we definitely could point to as an example, which is not plastic related, but the Good Food Purchasing Program, which I believe like Chicago schools already do it. I think there's a couple of other parts of the Chicago government that do it, but I won't go super deep into it. But basically, with the Good Food Purchasing Program is that they don't have. Usually, a lot of governments are required to take the lowest bid for someone who provides something. And that's no longer the case. So yes, organic food typically will be more expensive than regular food. And that's just all to say that we could do something similar like that in Chicago. Like we already have a blueprint to follow off of. So I think looking to models like the Good Food Purchasing, I think there's an opportunity for us to do that with plastics, or maybe we have compostable foodware, or we're able to invest more in reusable foodware.
And can you talk about the advocacy work you're doing around actually creating a Department of Environment for the city of Chicago?
Yes. So, long story short, it's been over a decade since we've had a Department of
10
Environment.
years.
Yeah. In December, it will be about a little over 10 years. And the importance of the department as it relates to waste, right, is that currently the Department of Streets and Sanitation oversees waste, and they're doing what they need to do. But we only recycle 9% of all of our waste. Having a department means that we have greater oversight. Having a department also means that we have more folks that can get creative and like, how do we reduce waste in the first place? How do we build out a circular economy? These are things that with the city, you also have people that are in DSS that are doing street sweeping. Like they have a very narrowed mission, and we need a department in order to do something that we can think about waste, but we can think about it from a more creative and environmental and public health centered perspective. So we will be having a social power hour on Monday. And so for folks that are interested in that, it's ilenviro.org/DOE. I'm sure I'll send it to somebody who can share it with you all. But yeah, we need a new department. We don't need a rinse and repeat of the previous one, which was great, but we really need one that's going to be looking towards public health, environmental justice, and just overall dealing with climate change and the environmental issues of today.
John, this question is for you. What are the points that environmentalists tend to debate is whether the best EPA policy, what the best EPA policy is, and how to best address this problem? For example, tell us more about chemical recycling and why it seems to be so controversial.
Ooh, I don't remember that one. You got me on the spot. But I'd like to diverge for this quarter and address PFAS. And one of the things, there's over 10,000 of these compounds out there, but you always hear that they want to regulate only one or two. And it's really a whack-a-mole game, like what we said earlier. And what I really believe we need to do is actually regulate on total organic fluorine so we can cover anything, because really there's no natural source for these compounds. And in my laboratory, we're working on a method to quickly analyze for total organic fluorine. But really, it's crazy because in the past, we should learn from the past. When we had PCB and flame retardant, that we would ban one, and then the chemical company would just make a slight modification to the structure. And then it's great job security for me. I mean, it's kept me employed. But I mean, really, I think we need to stop doing things that way and try to blanket cover especially regulating these things. And I've even thought about ways to try to do it with plastic, but it's a little more difficult because how do you differentiate lignin, which really is a polymer? It's a natural polymer from something like polyethylene. So I think that's my best shot at that one.
Fair enough. Nicely done. So this is for everybody, and we can start with you, Andrea. And we're about to open it up to to our audience for questions as well. So if you had a magic wand, what would your dream action be at either the state, the local level, the federal level? Obviously, you said earlier you work on it. And what's stopping that dream from happening? I hear John talk about the federal government and EPA a lot, and maybe not taking enough action on it. But start there, I guess.
Yeah, I do. So, there's a global treaty right now that's being negotiated. Had the opportunity to meet with State Department, and it's on their priority. They're very interested in it, and now we're pushing them harder to go farther. I get the opportunity to work with our colleagues in Canada. I was talking to them about that global treaty in the same way. I think the big, much more resource countries have to take a responsibility. And for me, it's very important that we use a global treaty to sort of set a new standard. And part of the discussion in that global treaty is about extended producer responsibilities, is holding corporations responsible for the impacts of what they do, both in production. And I'm on repeat on this because when you produce and you pollute, it has an impact on the people that live near it, and it's a disproportionate harm, right? And then it distributes itself once it starts falling apart. But the most concentrated and most devastating harm is in the production, and it's those folks who live near those production sources that we know historically have the most harm. So that's one thing. The other thing is we are in the middle of a discussion around a similar sort of national EPR here in the United States. Canada has gone further. I bring them up just because they're a trading partner with us. And economics is a way for us to drive things, that the more we can have economic models that demand responsibility to the folks who produce it, puts us in a very different place. I did public health for more than 20 years. I promise you, the cost of preventing something is a hell of a lot cheaper than the cost of care. I think we all just lived through that. It really is a difference. And the same is true with plastic. I mean, trying to figure out all of the end of life ways of getting it back is really hard. So national EPR, we have Break Free from Plastic, but you're going to see that actually broken into a couple different bills. There's going to be one on pre-production pellets. We were talking about nurdles. One of the problems with pre-production pellets is they're unregulated as they move around. So as they're moving from a container to the manufacturing, there is a lot of loss. And fortunately, there's been some good research on the distribution in rivers and the Great Lakes, where we have a lot of these production factories. Those pellets aren't just petroleum. They're soaked in these awful chemicals, and we're going to hopefully try to prevent those. And the last thing I would say is procurement. And I always go back to it, but it is also an economic engine and driver. If the United States, which is what we're trying to do with the GSA piece, and you'll probably see from Shed us asking you all to make comments to the federal government on this. If that happens, that is a big driver of what manufacturers are going to produce and how they respond to it. So those are a few things.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say too, is this on? Okay. I'll just say too, I think one, seconding Andrea, like anything that's reducing the use of plastic in the first place, I tell my friends all the time, because they know I'm like the environmental person, the recycling, can we stop? Can we just stop making that the number one thing? So anything that does actually reduce plastic. I think the second one is that I would like there to be some type of curriculum in school. And sorry, parents, I know some parents are like, stop forcing whatever, but I really think there could be some type of curriculum, because in high school, it literally took my science teacher saying, the next war is going to be over water. And that's what literally did it. It changed everything for me. So I would love to see some type of legislation that would require some type of environmental curriculum. The political barriers to that are obvious, but that's something that would be like a dream policy or action that I would love to see.
Sure. John?
Wow, I can really go to town on this one. One thing I'd like to see is better information for consumers. A lot of times you don't even know what you're purchasing, especially things like PFAS. I mean, without a mass spectrometer or an infrared laser, you're not
You don't
gonna
carry
know.
that around everywhere? Is that?
Anyways, you don't really know what you're purchasing. So I really think a lot of this could be solved with labeling. I mean, imagine if you bought something and it said this is going to live for 200 years. You might think twice before buying it, and then they'll think twice before making it. I think that would really help a lot of these issues. The same thing with PFAS. I think anything that has or even organic fluorine, it should be labeled as such. The other thing is I really want those MIT engineers to find a better material. I really think that would really solve a lot of problems. And even if tomorrow they do, I mean, we're still going to have legacy plastic. I got job security no matter what, so I'll have legacy plastic to be looking at for the rest of my life. But I just think finding new materials, and that's a really difficult thing because, like I said, plastic is inexpensive, but its properties are so nice. I mean, it's hard to design a new material that's going to be robust, but then it's going to break down right when you snap your fingers. But somebody will figure it out. What else was there?
I want to piggyback off your first point. So when you mentioned that nutritional labeling and calorie counting and all that came to mind. So what's it going to take to do something like that? Like, where do you start? Obviously on the policy side, but have you seen models elsewhere that might work in something like that?
EU actually has more clear,
Oh yeah.
much. So in the Break Free from Plastic, there's actually a whole section on reporting and labeling, and we
On
can
conta-
try to
on
do it at a
packaging?
state by state level, but this is one of those things that is much better if it happens
Mm.
at a federal level because, again, it makes it a lot harder for the manufacturers. But
I'd like to see some good stimulations in recycling too. I think we can do a much better job. We have to be a little careful though. I mean, nobody wants to put lead in a child's sippy cup, but we find it because of mismanagement of lead. Or mismanagement in recycling. It's amazing what I find in plastic. I've even found rare earth elements in plastic. And that's because electronic waste is finding its way into these recycling seams and unintentionally getting there. I think
And I'll just say that's why extended producer responsibility is a thing. It's not just about plastic, but it's also about electronic waste and all. Each electronic waste is wickedly awful and terrible. My dad worked in it his entire career. It's awful.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure each one of those industries who's producing these things is held responsible for the outcome of it.
Ever notice? Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's really funny. 'Cause I remember researching about the Basel Agreement, the failure of it, but just thinking too, like internationally, like how do we actually go about like holding them accountable? And I think it's like United States and one other group is the two people that were not part of the network. So then obviously it all falls apart. But that just came to my mind when I was thinking about that. Sorry.
And the one plug I would make, at least for MWRD, is we do a significant amount of community outreach and community events. And one of our main outreach events is our drug take back program, where individuals, growing up, you probably realize that, what do you do with medicine you don't take? You either flush them down the toilet or flush them down the sink and just get rid of them. You don't have to worry about anything. That is perhaps the most challenging part of our work in our wastewater is you can't do much when the antibiotics or whatever drugs you put into our water system, by the time it gets to us, it's pretty much diluted. So we have a significant amount of community outreach that we work with in partnership with the Cook County Sheriff's Office, where we collect drug takebacks. If you're a resident of Chicago, you can actually go to your local police district office to drop off your medicine. Obviously, you can also do it at Walgreens and CVS, but we try to go out to communities across Cook County where we come out to residents and meet them directly where they're at. So
Please do that.
please. Do we have questions? Okay.
Thanks. So I think some people here are Googling PFAS and PFAS. Is it PFAS? Is it PFOS? What is it?
PFAS is a large classic.
And
Hello?
why are there's a second part of that question. And why are they so resistant to breakdown? So can you explain what they are? How do you spell it? How do you pronounce it?
It's PFAS, and it's a large class of compounds, PFAS, which PFOS, PFOA, it's alphabet soup, I'm sorry. But those are all part of like over 10,000 of these not naturally, human-made materials. They're very unique because they are oil repellent, yet they're water soluble. And like the carbon fluorine bond is one of the strongest bonds known to organic chemists. And these are not natural compounds, so nature has not figured out a way to break them down yet. So, and actually they kind of resemble a lot of them fatty acids, which our bodies do take up. And structurally, they're very similar to that. So yeah, they just pretty much live forever like plastic. And a lot of times they're associated with plastic. We add them to plastics to make nonstick coatings. Common places, microwave popcorn, really high levels a lot of times of PFAS. And something you're eating. Fast food packaging usually contains PFAS, a lot of fabrics. And you can imagine you're sitting in your shorts and on a chair all day for 8 hours in a classroom, and it had the potential to take those up through your skin with your sweat, because your sweat enhances the uptake of these things. So yes, hopefully that explained what PFAS is. Perfluoroalkylated substances is what it stands for.
I'm just going to say one quick thing that you said that is really important, as I've learned, and I'm not a chemist, but how you just, as people are trying to manufacture PFAS, like forever chemicals, they can just make small adjustments in really like one little chain. I've been in meetings where they're like, there's this one, and that line was added or subtracted, and now it's a brand new one. And so that's the whack-a-mole problem with regulating. Oh, that just get changed, or and it's amazing how small the adjustment can be. It has the same devastating impact on human health, but they then would be able to skirt regulation.
That's why we should focus on just organic fluorine. In fact, in my opinion, we should focus on organic halides, chloride, all that stuff. It's not natural. And when are those damn organic chemists going to stop making these things? So, sorry if there's any organic. Oh. No, there are other ones.
Can we talk really quick about the microplastics coming off of our clothing and the things that we wash? Because we are hearing about that. So it seems like it's a situation without a solution.
Yeah, that's a rough one. So you've all heard about the filters, right? You put on your washing machines. That's great, but what do you do with that stuff after it comes out of your filter? You put it in landfill. I lay up at night thinking about this stuff. What do you do with it? Put it in concrete, put it in iron? I don't know. I'm trying to find a solution. So the clothing thing definitely, but I think moving away from a lot of the very synthetic materials that were designed to last forever, it would definitely help. I mean, right? Because there's a lot of cellulosic cotton, right? Cotton breaks down in the environment. There's a lot of cellulosic alternatives, but that's.
Some of the discussions I've been a part of is just being more creative, right? Like I think fast fashion is one of the big problems, right? And they'll just make stuff, and I'm trying to see if there's some stretch in this, and there is, and that probably means there's some sort of plastic in it, right? That doesn't have to be there. I can buy fitted clothes that fit me just fine without some sort of elastic in it, right? Or plastic. It is clearly integrated into this weave, right? It doesn't have to be that way. This is one of those times where I act like the old person. When my mom made me clothes, I'm not to be that bad, but like we don't have to have fabric. We can have clothes. We don't have to be without clothes in order to have clothes without the petroleum in it or the PFAS, right? Similarly, we can drink and have coffee without having liners that are incredibly toxic, right? Like my mom did just fine having coffee every morning without having it be in a cup that was really toxic. That wasn't that long ago. I think we just need to remind ourselves how quickly we got to here. It really was not that long ago. So some of these solutions don't have to be rocket science, literally do not need to be rocket science. Some of them are really right in front of us.
Yeah, diapers are along that line too. I mean, there was a time that we didn't have those diapers, but give me convenience or give me death. Yeah.
So I'm surprised, go ahead. I'm surprised the word greenwashing hasn't come up yet. So what are your opinions on collaborations such as Parley and Adidas? Are these real steps in the right direction or just performative action?
I think it's very performative, especially with fashion, because a lot of the stuff that does have like, oh, it's eco-friendly, it's ugly. It's ugly, or it's very limited in like what colors they actually provide. So I was at the store the other day and they had like Nikes doing it, and I'm like, oh, that's really cute, but I'm like, the shoes are ugly, so I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna buy them. But I think greenwashing is everywhere, and I think it bothers me because I think a lot of people well-meaning people purchase things because it is good. Like my parents are like, "Oh, look at this bottle; it's 90% recycled," and I'm like, but it does. It's good because now we're seeing it more, but I think it also kind of reinforces this idea that individually we have to do this, and if we just purchase our way, we can just purchase our way out of this, and really the idea is that you need to purchase and buy less of this. So sorry, that's like a long tangent, but greenwashing, I think is that's something that keeps me up at night.
Vegan upholstery is pleather. We just name what the stuff is.
You know,
So go ahead.
well, I was gonna say all the roads to hell are paved in good intentions, and that's one of the things we have to be careful of. Is a lot of times that our replacements are worse than what happened to paper bags. The environmentalists are the ones that told us to stop using paper bags, right?
So more unintended unintended consequences. Can the panel speak to potential unintended consequences of PFAS in compostable plastic materials that are on the rise as a seemingly sustainable alternative to single-use plastics?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry. Can you please?
PFAS and
You were having an anxiety attack?
Yeah, I just, yeah.
Can the panel speak to potential unintended consequences of PFAS in compostable plastic materials that are on the rise as a seemingly sustainable alternative to single-use plastics?
So one of the big problems, I'll use the compostable one, is that it's not necessarily very compostable. It often has a number of additives in it that actually are very hard to compost. Some are only compostable if in industrialized composting, which we have very little of. Most of this is why you'll hear me talk on repeat about reuse over than these, what I feel like are sometimes folk and constructed compostable things. Which actually still have really deadly chemicals inside of them. So I'd rather be able to folks be using truly sustainable, reusable pieces. And I think the other thing to think about in terms of PFAS is just what you said earlier, that it's everywhere, that it's in way more things, and things like PFAS are in an extraordinary amount of objects. And so it becomes extremely challenging. And that's why we have to kind of go upstream and hold folks responsible for not putting it in, rather than, this is the thing that I hate most, is when at the end of the life, when it's us as consumers, we have to figure out like what the biochemical complexion, complement is inside of an object that we're buying at the store. That's freaking impossible. So it's that being the where we're supposed to be taking action is a completely inefficient way of us taking action.
Okay, I have a couple more. Andrea, can you talk about the status of the Break Free from Plastics bill on the national level?
Sure. So Break Free from Plastic was an effort that many of national environmental NGOs got together. This is when I talk about collective impact. This is one of those things. So we pulled together a bill that was comprehensive. Sometimes we talk about big comprehensive bills as educational vehicles to try to move different things. We've been trying to move it as one big piece. It is likely that different elements are going to move when we have vehicles to drop them into. So you heard me talking about plastic pellets. Senator Durbin, last year, Senator Durbin came by Shed and dropped a bill on that one of his colleagues had actually worked on before. That's one component of it. There is a component of Break Free that is around EPR. There is a component about truth and labeling. There's a component about more efficient recycling, And really important, and this is very important in the NSA report, there has to be high quality reporting and monitoring that's longitudinal. So over time, federal tracking of this data to help. So it's not just John and his lab, but that we have many, and it's not just us here in Chicago or in LA who actually do track microplastics, but that there is a national effort for us to track it. Because if you don't count it, you don't know it, and you can't regulate it. So that's one really important element of it as well. I encourage everyone to call their elected officials and talk about Break Free and talk about how important it is and how important it is for us to join arms and try to move it forward. I also would encourage you to talk about the global treaty, because the senators it will eventually come to the members of Congress, and so they'll be able to take action on that as well.
Thanks, Sandra. So all the questions that we didn't get to, hopefully you'll be able to ask them after the panel downstairs. These are for Dean. So first one is, could the MWRD speak to the threat of PFAS in their biosolids compost? And secondly, why is the water district supporting the use of plastic turf for play areas when it is known that there are PFAS coming off of them as well as microplastics? So I'll hand it back to you.
If you can just slightly repeat just bullet points on what the first question was.
The first one, could the MWRD rep speak to the threat of PFAS in their biosolids compost?
Sure, yeah, that is one of the areas of research that we're currently doing. The challenge for MWRD is we're waiting for the federal government to make a significant ruling. We've been monitoring this issue for several years now, and dialogue has been coming from DC that they're going to make a decision by the end of this year on PFAS. And so it's going to be a national approach for us to look at what we do with our biosolids program. And frankly, we're on pins and needles because we just don't know where it's going to land. And it's going to be a significant challenge, not only to MWRD, but to all wastewater facility and agencies across the country. So everybody's on edge, waiting to hear where this administration is going to actually land on PFAS. And we're hopeful that they come around. We've submitted letters. The different water association agencies that we're part of have participated in public comments. So we're hopeful by the end of this year we'll have some guidance from the federal government. And then the second question.
And let me just jump
Sure.
in there to say that Senator Duckworth is on the provides oversight for EPA.
Yep.
And so she's on the committee that provides oversight. If you have an opinion about this, contact Senator Duckworth and encourage her to have conversation next time EPA members are before her committee. Sorry.
Sure. And then the second question, I am not familiar on the exact material that is used for our Space to Grow program. I think is the one that they may be referencing for it, but I'm happy to look into it. If whoever asked the question, I'm happy to get back to them offline.
Sorry, I have no service, so I cannot text you.
Sure.
I'm hoping to ask a question kind of to parlay off what you
Yeah.
said. So I have asked you about this before, so it's redundant, but since we have John here, I'm gonna ask it again.
Sure.
I've brought up the fact that there currently isn't any technology that I am aware of to filter out microplastics from water in wastewater treatment facilities. And the same, as far as I'm aware of, that we don't know of a way yet to filter out PFAS or PFAS. But I feel like, to me, that seems like a great way if we invested in that technology to mitigate, existing products on the market that we cannot remove everything, but we could at least provide a barrier to releasing those things into waterways and drinking water in our wastewater treatment facilities. I'm wondering, A, if you know of any investments in that technology, or if that is being worked on at all.
It's part of the job security.
I mean, and then also, I would love to see that become a regulation. Sure. That's a part of every wastewater treatment facility in the country. But I don't know if that's.
You want to take a step? Well, there's definitely technology. The question is it cost effective? With enough money and resources, we could do anything, right?
Sure.
But the other thing too, it is a logical place to address, but really that we should go further upstream.
Yeah, and I don't mean we should just do one, really we need kind of both. But
Sure.
I'm just thinking of all the
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and trying to address that.
We're going to be dealing with legacy PFAS from landfills as well. So, but actually, carbon does a really great job of removing a lot of PFAS. Activated carbon, we do a lot of that work. In fact, the Department of Defense is spending lots of money on PFAS remediation. In fact, we have some pretty large grants where we're actually looking at how to absorb PFAS to carbon and then destroy it. Because that's the thing is you can really do it because it's stuff, the nature of the material, it kind of wants to stick to everything already. So it's really easy to remove it. It's just the question is after you remove it, then what do you do with it? You put it in landfill? No, we got to find a way to destroy it. And I hope that answered your question.
Do we have anyone who else
We
doesn't
could
have?
talk more later if you like.
So we'll end the.
There's one question I'd like. I think I put it in the text, but it wasn't answered yet. But here's okay. Like Richard Heinberg is an author. He talks about who writes about energy, the environment, and how like it relates to the economy. And he said that our core ecological problem is not climate change; it is overshooting, and climate change is a symptom. So how should plastic pollution be addressed in the context of ecological overshoot?
Talk to me a little bit more. I want to answer the question well for you. So when you understand overshoot, what are you thinking of how the impacts of it are?
Okay, so like overshoot is okay. So carrying capacity is like the maximum load supportable by an environment. Okay, when you exceed that load, that's when you're in overshoot, right? And the point is that climate change is a symptom of that our society is in serious overshoot.
I appreciate. So I think one of the challenges that we've been talking around plastic is that it's plastic and PFAS, other forever chemicals. They're toxins, and we don't, as biological creatures, whether they be wildlife or humans, we don't have the capacity to fight off the negative impacts. It's a toxin. It causes harm to us. So the overshoot actually, I think, happens pretty early. And that we've gone way over that overshoot. Like we have gone massively beyond it. But I think your point is really important because when I first started doing this work 5 years ago, we would say, oh, we just have to prove to everyone that it's actually everywhere, and then it'll be okay. But that's not actually the truth, right? We actually have to understand that it's harmful to folks in its production and in its waste, and there is no safe way in which for it to be created and become waste without it potentially having harm. So the level of tolerance that we have is way beyond. Like we've gone way up here, and the level of tolerance is down here. So I think the overshoot we've already gone is massively beyond what our human and wildlife capacity actually can hold. But it's a really important way of thinking about this because that tells us that we've steered way off course, and we have quite a bit of a way to come back in order to be more sustainable. Thank you. That's a great question.
I can add to it before the gentleman asks his questions. I think it's just I think part of it is like this human nature idea. We think that there's always going to be more space to put more trash. There's always going to be, no matter what happens, like we'll be okay. Human will be able to engineer our way out of it. And so I don't want to say human nature. I feel like I feel like that's what it is. And I think just generally, not just with PFAS or plastic, we have this imaginary image that what we do here is not going to affect anywhere else and that there's going to be more of a world that we can still go back and use. And I think that's just something that just we do naturally, but there's a way for us to address that so that we don't continue to, I don't know, take advantage of Earth. I hate to say it sounds really corny, but I'm just saying like that's what's happening.
It'll be somebody else's problem, not ours.
Yes. So that's my response to your question.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on a person who talked about overshooting. It seems like it's part of this discussion is embedded within a much larger discussion, which is our whole economic model. It used to be a stakeholder model. We took care of our employees, our customers, and our community. Somewhere in the 70s and 80s, we shifted to a shareholder model. We forgot about our stakeholders and started to pay attention to our investors.
So we're gonna wrap it up with, if people tonight, if you, each of you can mention your top 3 things we can walk away. Yeah, if we can walk away with tonight as attending this presentation. John, you'll get started with you.
Well, I think, hello. I think I just encourage everybody to think twice about what you buy and where it's going to go. For me, I don't have garbage service. I live out in the middle of nowhere. And you really get creative when you can't just throw things away. So look in that trash. Maybe try to not take the trash out for a week or 2. See how that goes. Report back to me.
Seconding John, think about what you buy. Please continue to recycle, but please stop spreading the gospel about it. Thank you. And then the third thing, the Department of Environment, that is ilenviro.org/DOE. Participate in our social power hour. Follow us on social media. Tweet at your alder. Anything that you can do to really raise awareness about the need for a new department.
We need a new department. We need a department. We need to be staffed. We need quality folks. We have to integrate public health into it. I'm so glad. Please join this effort. The other thing we need to do, and you heard me go on and on as I got so excited about what happened in California, is we need to join arms and we need to fight like heck for our state and the entire Great Lakes region to be moving forward for EPR bills that really hold producers responsible. It is something we can do. We can do it when we do it together. We have a great model for that, and we have a lot of well-trained individuals in California who would be more than happy to talk to you about how they made this thing happen. We can do it here. I want us to feel confident and proud about being from the Great Lakes in Illinois, and to have a little backbone and get in there and get in this fight. We're going to need to join arms to do this, and I really want to fire folks up to try to take this fight to our region. We need it here. The last thing I'm going to say is, and this comes from the Michigander in me from southeastern Michigan, full of industry, right? I got to see pollution after pollution after pollution, and I got to see people's lives destroyed from it and shortened. We live in the similar region around here in Chicago and through Northwest Indiana. We need to improve the lives of those folks who live near those factories by reducing the amount of awful things that are being produced. And we need to see that as all of our responsibilities. So I really want us to really think about how we can join hands together and try to do this great work. So thanks for coming today. I'm so impressed.
Before, real quick, I just want to say too, is don't be discouraged about recycling. Even though I say it's only 9%, if you don't recycle, if you don't recycle it, 0%. Okay, and there's great infrastructure, it's there. So please still give it a shot.
Let's give these
Thank you.
panelists a round of applause.
Thank you, and thank you all again for coming out tonight for this really important and inspiring discussion that hopefully we have a lot of takeaways to act on all these very important things. I do have some public service announcements for everybody before we go. I hope that you can all stop into Weiner Beer Company's tap room. We're going to be having green drinks is taking place downstairs. And hopefully this will be a good opportunity to continue talking about those action plans and those goals and what we can do next. On the way to the tap room, you'll see an information table that tells a little bit more about what we do at the plant, how we do things differently. And so that gets into some of the packaging, some examples that I talked about earlier, how Sacred Serve does their packaging differently as well. And also for your radar, that we have a fall edition of Reusapalooza. And what that is a really exciting event that talks about its education and its strategies for dealing with waste. And again, purchasing and consumption is a big piece of it. We can't recycle our way out of our waste problem. And as we saw in the slideshow earlier, there was the pollution prevention hierarchy, starting with avoid, reduce, and just all the strategies before you get down to even having to deal with those tricky to recycle things. But for that event, we have a whole bunch of really great partners. We have Reduce Waste Chicago, Earth Paint, Waste Shed, EcoShip. We actually have an EcoShip drop-off, and I'm happy to talk more about them. Working Bikes, Star Farm, which is a local urban farm that does composting services as well. Dean will be talking about a prescription drug drop-off So lots of things like that to help in the shift from reusables and recyclables to more durable items. This amazing team will be able to help you along the way. So save the date, that's Sunday, October 2nd, and we'll have information out there on our socials and all that other good stuff. So as we wind down in this room, you're welcome to linger in the Packingtown Museum. I'm available if anybody has any questions about the building. John Adel, the founder of the plant, is in the back. So grab one of us if there's any questions. And hopefully the session has helped lay the groundwork for more effective and more thoughtful consumption and how we use things and how we really think. I don't know about keeping my trash in my house for 2 weeks, but who knows? We'll see what happens. Small steps. We'll do what we can. So looking forward to continuing the conversation in the tap room and beyond. So hope to chat with you after this as well.